everyone. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Larysa Kautz to the show. Larysa is the president and CEO of Melwood, and Melwood is a leading employer advocate and preferred provider for people with disabilities based in Maryland. They have a focus on live, work, and play, and today we're going to focus on live. So welcome to the show, Larysa.
Thank you so much, Stephen. I appreciate it. It's nice to be here.
So tell me a little bit about Melwood and how it supports accessible living, accessible housing for its community.
Sure. So Melwood has been around for 6 decades. So for 60 years, we have been creating inclusive opportunities for people with disabilities to be able to do truly anything they choose to do, whether it's children with disabilities to have the same camp experience that other children have, and to be able to go to an integrated inclusive camp with their siblings, which again was unheard of over 20 years ago, or whether it's work. So we help train people with disabilities, help evaluate their skills and passions and interests and abilities, and then get them on a career path to what they want to do. Earning a wage creates independence. We've done a lot with play. We've done a lot with work. What we haven't done a lot of is in a living space. And the more work that we do with varying populations of people with disabilities, be they physical, be they neurodivergent, or a huge array of different disabilities that create barriers to employment, barriers to independence, what we're hearing more and more of is this housing struggle. We've created this program called Ability that teaches mostly young adults on the autism spectrum different tech skills to be able to get their foot in the door for various types of jobs. And our first cohort had 12 individuals. We started the program in Arlington, Virginia, and you get to know the people when you're spending every day with them and working through certifications and pre-development, training, and all of a sudden you hear all the stories of, I'm getting kicked out of my parents' house because they can't handle me anymore. Or I have tried living independently with a neurotypical roommate and it's not working out and I'm being kicked out and I don't know what to do. So we actually had, I believe, 2 or 3 individuals just in that first cohort where we heard about these housing struggles and barriers. And then we also created a skilled trades training program called Building Paths. And the more involvement we have with individuals with disabilities that are older, that are independent, that we hear that they want to live in the community. They don't want to be stuck in group homes. They no longer want to be stuck in their parents' basement. And also we hear a lot from parents who don't know what will happen when they pass. And they might not have siblings that can help take care of their loved ones. And so, from all of these different people, there's the constant push for, we need a lot more inclusive and accessible housing. And what are we going to do? And, Melwood is rich in a lot of resources. I have amazing people that work for me. We have 1,600 employees across the DC area that work very hard.
Did you say 1,600?
I did say 1,600.
Wow. So let me ask you, before you delve into what you decided to do, Larysa, sure. First thing, clarifying, does your agency serve people of all types of disabilities, or is it more strictly people with intellectual and developmental disabilities?
The great majority of the people that we serve do have intellectual and developmental disabilities, but we do serve a wide array of individuals with disabilities. Like we work a lot with veterans with PTSD and military sexual trauma. We're a big employer of people with disabilities as well. So about 1,000 of those 1,600 are people with significant disabilities, which again are mostly neurodivergent individuals, but we do have folks that have hearing, vision issues, other physical disabilities, as well as mental, behavioral, issues.
And are your clients primarily in the Washington, D.C. metro area, or do you have clients elsewhere?
Mostly, I'd say it's a little broader than the DC metro area because we do reach all the way almost to Delaware and all the way to Southern Virginia, but I think there are people that probably would just determine that being the DC metro area. So mostly Maryland, DC, and Virginia. Yeah. Although the more we do virtually, obviously with COVID, like our Bill IT cohort, we're starting to do those virtually so we can serve and train and upskill folks that are anywhere in the country now.
Oh, wow. That's great. So I would love in another time and place to talk about your work in employment services, because that sounds really cool also. And not necessarily something I've seen a lot of in other states where I've talked to people about those issues. However, today, what I would like to learn about is you mentioned that you began to observe as an agency a lot of your clients having housing issues. And obviously, housing is a component for people being able to support themselves in housing is a big component in people being able to support themselves and get gainful employment. So you guys decided that you could push the needle on this, that you could make a difference. So can you share with my listeners what you thought you'd be able to do?
So, one of the first hurdles that you have to face when you're thinking about building housing, of course, is land. And property. So that is one thing that Melwood is rich in, which we're very grateful for. We have a parcel of property in Arlington, Virginia, which is right up the street from National Landing, where Amazon is moving in and all of that. We also have properties in Maryland that I could envision potentially in the future looking to see about developing housing. But what made this location so incredibly obvious that it should be housing is the fact that there's a bus stop on the corner. There is a metro within a 12-minute walk of the building.
A subway station.
Yes. Which will take you directly into DC or to other locations in Virginia. And so in order to be able to live independently and to be able to get to work, public transportation is always such a big barrier and a hurdle for people with disabilities to get to work. So between the access to public transportation and the fact that truly, Arlington, Virginia is a place where people want to live. And unfortunately, right now, I think the median price for a single family home there is like 1.2 million. So I think a huge percentage of the zoning of Arlington, I'm gonna guess it's more than 80% is zoned for just single family homes. And so you have a lot of people that are left out of the equation that are commuting over an hour or longer to be able to get to good jobs in Arlington. And now with Amazon's putting a headquarters there. Nestle has a headquarters in Arlington, and I believe Boeing has just said they're creating a new space there. So there's tech jobs, there's manufacturing jobs, there's office jobs, and I want the population that we serve to be able to have access to those jobs. And the first, you need a Melwood for the upskilling and the training and to get the right certifications and experience, but you also need to just have access to be able to get there. And this location is truly, I think, perfect. And so we have a little ways to go. We have to do some rezoning.
This is a property you guys already owned from through your organization. Okay.
Yeah, and it was an old elementary school that was basically, there was a land swap that was done many years ago with Arlington County. We had the property that they wanted to take over to build a metro station, and they said, "Here, take this old elementary school that we're not using anymore," because they built schools elsewhere. And so it's a building that's underutilized in terms of the way it's laid out, right? We've got really wide hallways that used to have lockers in them. We don't need, we need more programming space. So the question that my board had to weigh when we started looking at this is, they looked at all the options. They looked at everything from, we sell this property and we see where else we could go to provide services. We fully redevelop this building, keep it the shell and redevelop the inside. Or we look at what else we could develop in this space that would serve our needs and the needs of our constituents. And so I'm lucky to have an innovative kind of forward-thinking board where we saw that most of our property is a paved over parking lot, and you have this short 2-story building that's not well laid out to maximize its use. And so the thought was, well, what could we put in this space that would fit with the community, that would add value to the community, and that would help serve our constituents? And we had the foresight to be able to say, let's explore building affordable housing with a large number of units set aside for people with disabilities.
I love it. So, was there any pushback in the community and by your board members and staff around, well, we shouldn't do housing. That should be a housing specialist agency, or that should be a government thing. Did you have any kind of thoughts around, is this appropriate role for us?
Absolutely. We have, we have board members that have never experienced what affordable housing looks like. And I think that sometimes there's still the perception around, quote, like public housing, and
Right.
what that means. And are these tenements and what are we talking about? And so we have great examples out here actually of some buildings that were built that are very inclusive and even tailored to individuals with neurodivergent tendencies. And that's, I know you've spoken to them or will speak to them, but Main Street Rockville is an incredible example of a building that was built to be inclusive and integrated. And so, I like to take the bull by the horns and show people for them to be able to see what it is the vision is. So I had one of my board retreats at Main Street Rockville, and we were
Wow,
hosted
that's
there.
great.
And the wonderful Jillian Copeland gave a tour of the building, and they got to see what looks like an amazingly developed market rate apartment building that looks like any other. And it has a yoga studio. It has, an art room, common space, but it's tailored and made in a way that's truly accessible and that truly adds value to the people that live there and is welcoming to someone on the autism spectrum, has built-in things like timers on stoves that can, help ding and inform you when the stove's been on for too long, which frankly, I think is a value add to a lot of us and not just
Yes.
to
Yeah.
people that are neurodivergent. But that inspired my board and really, I think, brought us to the level of being able to envision what we could do in Arlington. And I think that some of the neighbors and some of the people in the community haven't seen it. They haven't seen that, and they don't maybe have the same vision of what it is going to be that is coming to their neighborhood. When you have any development, there's always concerns about traffic, about density, about adding more children to already oversubscribed schools. What flavor of folks are going to be coming to the community. And so we're doing our best to have community conversations. We started this whole process even before we had fully decided that we're going to develop housing by having an open community meeting where we created this charrette where we wrote down everything we heard from the community. And we heard, we want green spaces, we want childcare, we want affordable housing, we want art spaces. Like there were 3 or 4 things that were wanted, and we heard it, and we looked at the value that those things add to both our community as well as that community. And I very firmly believe that what we're doing is responsive to what we've heard from the community. I think we're going to have to allay some fears about traffic, about density, about children. I think they're worried about having cars parked all over the streets that now don't have that many cars. So we are spending a good amount of money to build underground parking under our footprint. Yeah, and we're going to make sure there's enough for what's required for the folks in the building. But Melwood itself is not leaving this space, right? Like we are a community member, we are a service provider, and part of this is to ensure that we retain at least 20,000 or so square feet for our own programming space, which means I'm going to have a bunch of parking spaces for my employees that need to be there every day, but those spots will be empty after 3 or 4 o'clock, and I'm happy to make them available to the restaurants down the street that have overflow parking, or we let the churches in the neighborhood park on weekends when they have services because we're not using the parking lot.
Right.
So we're already a community partner. We're deeply embedded in the community, and we're staying, and we're going to continue to do all of the good work that we do now, except it'll be even better and it'll add more to the community.
So where are you at with getting approval for what you want to do?
So there are many steps that you jump through. This being Arlington, although I think a lot of jurisdictions have their own special hoops.
We're certainly familiar with it in California.
So we have to first start with a general land use plan amendment, so a GLUP.
A GLUP, I love it.
So the general land use. We do. This is just the word we all know now, the GLUP study, the GLUP amendment.
So because you're proposing using the space differently than what
Correct.
it is now.
Correct. So you have like two tiers of land use in this area, where you have the general land use plan, which talks about different large areas of Arlington and what are the uses that the county has kind of approved for it. And then once you have a land use plan kind of designation, you dig deeper into the specific kind of zoning. So whether it's residential or commercial or whatever, that there's like two layers of it. So our first step is to get a GLUP use study. So we've gotten through the tier 1, which was basically coming to the county and to a commission that's made up of members of the community as well, and saying, we would really like you to initiate a study of the use of this property to make sure that the current GLUP use is really the most effective and efficient for what we want to do and what it could be used for. They said yes, they think it's worth doing the study. So hooray, step 1 is done. Now the second tier is now specifically digging deeper into the specific designation that we're seeking. And so we are seeking low-rise residential. We're seeking the lowest density possible designation because we are largely surrounded by single-family homes.
Right.
Even though in the immediate vicinity, we've got churches, some commercial buildings, and a park. So that's nice, as we have some buffer. But because it's single family all around us, we want to be thoughtful. We want to be thoughtful about the community and the nature of it, and not build a skyscraper.
Right.
So this next phase will help determine whether we can get residential density at all. And then the step after that will be the zoning, which will help determine kind of the maximum height of the building, whether there's any other kind of accommodations or things we would need to promise the county and provide.
Like conditions, they say, we'll give it to you, but you have to do this and this and this.
Yeah, and some of the things I can envision, like when they did the land swap a long time ago, one of the provisions was that school had been used as a polling place for a long time. And so when the land swap was done, we agreed that we would continue to run it as a polling place and allow the county to come in and do that, twice a year. And that restriction expired like a long time ago, but we still do it. Like I said, we're a nonprofit. We have a public purpose. I am happy to have the public come in and see what we do and see the value that we add and continue to be a good citizen in the community. So I don't envision that there will be any concerns with that, for example, being something that continues, et cetera.
So first you have to get the GLUP. When do you expect to have an answer on that?
I am hoping by the end of this year, this calendar year.
End of 2022. And then what happens?
Yeah. And then we go into the zoning. Then we apply for the correct zoning that we'd like to get, which I imagine will take at least probably another 6 months or so, or maybe longer.
A different committee of government authority, right?
Yeah,
different
I think
people.
the land use committee, right? Exactly, has to make a recommendation to the county board, and then if my lawyers are listening and I'm getting this wrong, I'm sorry. This is the CEO's knowledge of the process.
But another level, yeah.
Right. And then after that, once we know that we have the right to use the land in a certain way, we then are going to have to submit an application for low-income housing tax credits to the state, and saying, we want to have this type of array of affordable housing for this amount of people in this area, median income, and across the board. And this is how many units we want. We're aiming for around 100 to 104, because that seems to work the best from like the financial modeling and that kind of stuff. And I would like to set aside the maximum number of units that we can for people with disabilities, while still retaining a fully integrated and inclusive space. And so I know some of the questions that have been raised out there that I've heard is, well, why are you only setting aside 30% of the units for people with disabilities? And it's
why?
Well, it's because we have a mission to serve people with disabilities in the most inclusive way possible. And so it's the same reason that today's disability policy is going away from sheltered workshops. And it's going away from, I think for a very long time, we've served, meaning the community have served
Advocates. Yeah.
advocates, the community have served people well with the best intentions. But I think it's often been seen as creating a space for people with disabilities that's separate.
Yeah.
And it was the best we could do, I think, in a lot of those times where, I mean, we've gotten away from institutionalization. Like, we've gotten away from just putting people away and not even worrying about them, to trying to create more spaces in the community where they're having jobs, they're having wages. But what we did was we often created camps for just people with disabilities, or we created job environments for people with disabilities. And the future needs to be inclusion. It has to be breaking down the barriers for inclusive living. And so, while I'd like to create as much housing as possible, I think in any one building or any one location, I would like for it to not turn into a group home or an environment where, again, it's just people with disabilities. We need the more inclusive environments we can have, the more we'll be breaking down barriers by having people interact with others with disabilities.
Right. So you're going to go to your GLUP, general land use.
Mm-hmm.
Then you're going to do zoning. Then you're going to apply for tax credits. Then is breaking ground on the building next, or are there other steps first?
It should be, because as we're applying for tax credits, we'll be doing things simultaneously to get the rest of the financing in place. And so, assuming we get the tax credits, we are going to know kind of what that financial model looks like, where the equity is coming in, where we need to take on debt and loans. Fingers crossed at that point, they'll be breaking ground, but that's probably at least a few years out.
Right. So I'm presuming that the design and architecture, you already have it all designed and laid out what it's going to look like when you get the permission to build it.
No, not yet.
Okay.
Because what we've put together is kind of our best guess of the shell of the building, in order to be able to we had to do a feasibility study to see, like, economically what it would look like if we had, 50 units, 100 units, 150 units, to see kind of where the building would hit kind of its sweet spot of not being too tall, not being too bohemian and scaring the neighborhood, but having enough units to have the right economics to make it work. And so we also took into account things like making sure there's green space in front of the building. We could have pushed it out to the curb and had a huge boxy structure, but instead we thought, let's realistically think through, like, we want to step down the building towards single family homes. We'd like to preserve the front lawn because it's really great green space. We'd like to preserve the big tree that we have, that we do a Miracle on 23rd Street lighting every year for the community, which, we've had hundreds of people come. It's been really great. So it's a shell, and it's a kind of best guess of what we would like to build. Now, I think through the GLUP study, through the zoning, if we get pushback on certain things, like the height on one end, if we have to bring that down, there's other parts of the building that are going to have to expand in different areas. It has to be rough for a while. But once we get the zoning and the site plan, at the zoning level of course, there's site plan approval, which is after zoning. But at that point, we will have designed the building that's going to be built.
Right. So we only have a few more minutes left, so I have to ask you some more other things.
Okay.
Yeah. So, because I know it's absolutely amazing what you're doing. So first of all, it's all financed through the assets of your organization, or do you guys need to get loans and stuff to build it?
We will need loans, and we'll need, the nice thing about tax credit deals is that you get people buying the tax credits and putting in equity. So we'll have a good amount of equity that's great, that's given to us as straight up money to build the building, that those folks will get tax credits over 15 years, and then loans. There'll be state, federal, whatever loans we need to be able to make it work. Right.
And so when did your board approve going down this road? And how long ago did your board approve, okay, we're going to do this? When did that happen?
So it's been a process of approvals, because it was first it was an approval, I'd say, in September of 2023, 2020, I think, September 2020, we really had a retreat and talked through, here is the vision, here's what we'd like to do. And they said, we like it. Here are some of our concerns, dig deeper and bring us back another report. So then we did kind of the modeling and all of that, came back. And then we said, all right, we want to do an RFP for a developer. Then we put out an RFP. Right. We've chosen a developer. We've entered into an MOU, which then the board had to approve. They're kind of at this point, I think the next step might be the kind of definitive for sure step, which is really kind of when we sign the operating agreements and documents with the developer. At that point, we're kind of tied in to doing it unless something horrible happens and everything goes wrong.
Let's hope not. But I wanted to get at is you started getting really serious and intentional about this in 2020, let's say. Yeah. But you're probably not going to have any residents in this structure, even though you owned the land, even though you didn't need to acquire land for 4 years. It's like at least 4 years. All right. So how optimistic are you about the challenges ahead of you not derailing you from being able to do this with your land?
I'm pretty optimistic because of the conversations I've had over the last year with the county, with the staff, with our neighboring churches, with our neighboring businesses, and also with the number of neighbors themselves that have reached out, that have said, we love what you're doing, let us know what we can do to support. And so I think even though there is opposition, I think a lot of the specifics of the opposition that I've heard, I think we're already addressing in our design and in our commitment to making sure the community gets something that is great for them. I'm sure there will be voices that we can never change because maybe there's underlying motivations that aren't being raised that I can't address if they're not raised. But yeah.
Let's suppose that there's somebody, let's hope, that there's someone listening to my podcast today, listening to you and I talk, who might have an interest in doing something like this themselves. What advice would you give them based on where you're at in your process now, understanding you've got a lot more still happening, but what advice do you have for others, advocates around the country who might be intrigued by what you're doing?
Well, first, I'm always happy to have people reach out to me and to my team and ask questions. But really, and generally, that's what I would say, is I would say, if you look, you don't even have to look that hard. You're going to find folks that are doing this, even if it's not in your state, even if it's not in your locality. But all of us that are doing this are, and I think they could find a lot of them on your podcast list, because I looked through your guests and you've got some pretty impressive folks in this field. Reach out to other nonprofits that are doing it. And that's what I did. You know, I reached out to some nonprofit affordable housing developers, and they were very gracious about referring me to churches, to other nonprofits that had property that had wanted to do something like this. And there's so many different ways of structuring it. You know, we're structuring it in a way where we are the entity that this is our mission. This is what we want to do. So this housing will be part of Melwood. Other organizations like churches will often transfer or sell or assign a piece of their property or land, and they really don't have anything to do with the housing. And that's, again, it's a different way of structuring it, and it helps bring an infusion of cash into the nonprofit and helps create affordable housing. My mission will be to reach out to anybody doing any kind of affordable housing to talk about setting aside more units for people with disabilities and who are neurodivergent, because I know that there are community groups like our Stomping Ground and others who have lists of people roommates and with caregivers and with the community support to make sure that it's successful, that love to get their hand on some of these buildings. And it really, I mean, on the most economic level, it saves the state and the federal government money to be able to have people with disabilities living independently in the community with the supports they need from a community organization, instead of being homeless or instead of being destitute and having to face housing challenges.
Wow. You say that with such clarity. It's so wonderful to hear you speak that way, and to make it so straightforward for people to understand. Larysa, if people want to get more information, they should just go to your website. What's the website they should check out?
Absolutely. It's melwood.org. So it's melwood.org. And they can even just click on like there's a communications email. I think it's communications@melwood.org that they can send messages if they're interested. And of
Well,
course,
this is.
we love taking donations. So
Are
if
you
people,
planning any fundraisers or events for this project that
we
I
are.
could share with my listeners?
I can share that information with you after the fact.
Perfect.
I'll
Yeah,
have to get
because in my show notes, I might be able to put
that would
a
be
link
great.
for that. Yeah. So thank you, Larysa. I could talk to you for hours, but I really do appreciate the time, and thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for inviting me. It was really great speaking to you.